The dusty horizon shimmered like molten copper as Mason Thorne watched a figure stumble across the Texas plains, collapsing not 50 yards from where his horse stood grazing near the creek bed outside Terlingua. He had been tracking a stray calf for the better part of the morning, but the sight of someone in distress pushed all other concerns from his mind. Mason grabbed his canteen and spurred his gelding forward, reaching the fallen stranger in moments. When he dismounted and knelt beside them, he realized it was a woman, her face sun-blistered and lips cracked from dehydration. Her dress was torn and dusty, her dark hair matted with sweat and dirt. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, though the harsh sun had aged her features prematurely. Mason carefully lifted her head, supporting it against his knee as he brought the canteen to her lips. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice low and gentle. "Just small sips. Not too fast." The woman's eyelids fluttered open, revealing striking hazel eyes that seemed to spark with both gratitude and desperation. She drank greedily at first, but Mason pulled the canteen back, knowing too much water too quickly could make her sick. After a moment, he let her drink again, watching as color slowly returned to her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse and barely audible. "I thought I was going to die out here." "What happened? Where did you come from?" Mason asked, scanning the horizon for any sign of a wagon or horse that might have belonged to her. "Stage got attacked 2 days ago," she managed, her breathing still labored. "Everyone scattered. I ran and just kept running until I could not anymore." Mason felt his jaw tighten. Bandits had been plaguing the routes between Terlingua and the nearby settlements for months now, growing bolder with each passing week. The law was stretched thin in this part of Texas, and most folks had to rely on their own wits and weapons to survive. "Can you stand?" he asked. She nodded weakly, and Mason helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as they made their way to his horse. The gelding, a steady bay named Russet, stood patiently as Mason lifted the woman into the saddle before mounting behind her. She leaned back against his chest, too exhausted to maintain her own balance. "Name is Mason Thorne," he said as they started the ride back toward town. "I work at the Double T Ranch just outside Terlingua." "Fiona," she replied softly. "Fiona Ellis. I was on my way to El Paso to meet my cousin. She runs a boarding house there." "El Paso is a fair distance from here. You were lucky to make it as far as you did." Fiona did not respond, and Mason realized she had drifted into an uneasy sleep against him. He adjusted his hold on the reins, making sure she would not slip from the saddle, and urged Russet into a steady walk. The September sun beat down mercilessly, and he was grateful they had only a few miles to cover before reaching town. Terlingua, in the year 1883, was a small mining community that had sprung up around the quicksilver deposits discovered in the surrounding hills. The town consisted of a main street lined with wooden buildings, most of them weathered and dusty from the harsh desert climate. There was a general store, a saloon, a small church, a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, and a handful of other establishments that served the miners and ranchers who called this remote corner of Texas home. Mason guided Russet down the main street, drawing curious glances from the townsfolk who recognized him. He was well known in Terlingua, having worked at the Double T for the past 5 years since he turned 20. At 25, he had earned a reputation as a reliable ranch hand with a quiet demeanor and a strong work ethic. He kept to himself mostly, preferring the company of cattle and horses to the rowdy atmosphere of the saloon. He stopped in front of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house and carefully dismounted, then lifted Fiona down from the saddle. She stirred as her feet touched the ground, blinking in confusion before seeming to remember where she was. "Easy," Mason said again, that same gentle tone he had used with the horses. "We are at the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson will take good care of you." The front door opened, and Mrs. Patterson herself emerged, a stout woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her expression softened when she saw Fiona's condition. "Good Lord, what happened to this poor girl?" "Stage attack," Mason explained. "Found her collapsed out by Miller Creek. She needs food, water, and rest." "Bring her inside," Mrs. Patterson said, stepping aside to let them pass. "I've got a room ready. Come on, dear. Let us get you cleaned up and fed." Mason helped Fiona inside, supporting her as they climbed the stairs to a small but clean room on the second floor. Mrs. Patterson bustled about, fetching water and linens, clucking her tongue sympathetically as she took in Fiona's bedraggled state. "You did a good thing, Mason," Mrs. Patterson said. "She would not have lasted another day out there." "Anyone would have done the same," Mason replied, though they both knew that was not entirely true. Plenty of folks in these parts looked out for themselves first and foremost. Fiona caught his hand as he turned to leave. "Thank you," she said, her hazel eyes meeting his. "I mean it. You saved my life." Mason felt something stir in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert heat. "You are welcome, Miss Ellis. Rest now. I will check on you tomorrow if that is all right." She nodded, releasing his hand reluctantly, and Mason found himself equally reluctant to leave. But Mrs. Patterson shooed him out, insisting that Fiona needed privacy and rest, and Mason had no choice but to comply. He spent the rest of the day thinking about Fiona, about the way she had looked at him with those striking eyes, about the feel of her leaning against him during the ride to town. It was foolish, he told himself. She was a stranger, someone passing through on her way to somewhere else. Once she recovered, she would continue on to El Paso, and he would never see her again. But that night, as he lay in his bunk at the ranch house, staring up at the wooden ceiling, Mason could not stop replaying their encounter in his mind. There had been something about her, something beyond the obvious gratitude of someone whose life had been saved. A spark, perhaps, or a connection he could not quite name. The next morning, Mason rode into town earlier than necessary, using the excuse of picking up supplies from the general store. He tied Russet to the hitching post outside Mrs. Patterson's boarding house and climbed the steps, his heart beating faster than it had any right to. Mrs. Patterson greeted him at the door with a knowing smile. "She is awake and asking for you," the older woman said. "Second door on the right, upstairs." Mason felt his face grow warm but nodded his thanks and made his way up the narrow staircase. He knocked softly on the door, and Fiona's voice called for him to enter. She looked remarkably better than she had the previous day. Her face had been scrubbed clean, her dark hair brushed and pulled back with a ribbon, and she wore a simple calico dress that Mrs. Patterson must have lent her. She was sitting up in bed, a tray of half-eaten breakfast on her lap, and she smiled when she saw him. "Mr. Thorne," she said, setting the tray aside. "I was hoping you would come." "Just wanted to make sure you were recovering all right," Mason said, suddenly feeling awkward and unsure of where to put his hands. He settled for holding his hat, turning it slowly in his fingers. "You look much better." "Thanks to you," Fiona said. "Mrs. Patterson told me you insisted on paying for my room and board. You did not have to do that." "It was nothing," Mason said, though in truth it had been most of his month's wages. "You needed help and I was able to give it." Fiona studied him for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "Why?" she asked finally. "You do not know me. Most people would have just pointed me toward town and gone about their business." Mason considered the question. Why had he done it? He could have simply given her directions, made sure she could walk, and left her to make her own way. But the thought had never even crossed his mind. My mother used to say that we are all just one bad day away from needing help ourselves, he said. Seemed like you were having about the worst day possible. I could not just ride away. You gave me more than I asked, Fiona said softly. More than I expected from anyone in this world. You gave me kindness when I had none left to give myself. Those words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Mason felt that strange warmth in his chest again, stronger this time, spreading through him like wildfire. I should let you rest, he said, though he made no move toward the door. Stay, Fiona said quickly, then added more softly, please, if you can spare the time. I would like to hear about Terlingua, about you. It would be nice to talk to someone. So Mason stayed. He pulled up a chair and sat beside her bed, and they talked. He told her about the Double T Ranch, about the cattle drives and the hard work and the satisfaction of a job well done. He told her about Terlingua, about the miners who came seeking their fortunes and the families who had built lives in this harsh but beautiful land. He talked more than he had talked to anyone in years, and Fiona listened with genuine interest, asking questions and sharing her own stories. She had been born in Missouri, she told him, but her parents had died when she was young. She had been raised by an elderly aunt who had passed away 6 months ago, leaving Fiona alone in the world except for her cousin in El Paso. The stage journey had been her attempt to start over, to find a new life somewhere she might belong. I do not have much, she admitted. Everything I owned was in my trunk on that stage, and the bandits took it all. The clothes I am wearing now belong to Mrs. Patterson. I am going to have to find work somehow, save up enough money to continue to El Paso. There is work here in Terlingua if you want it, Mason said before he could think better of it. Mrs. Patterson could probably use help at the boarding house, or the general store is always looking for someone. The school teacher mentioned needing an assistant for the fall term. Fiona looked at him, surprise evident in her expression. You would want me to stay? I think you should do what makes you happy, Mason said carefully. But if you wanted to stay, at least for a while, I would not mind. I would like to see you again. A slow smile spread across Fiona's face, transforming her features from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. I would like that too, she said. Over the following weeks, Fiona did stay in Terlingua. She took a position helping Mrs. Patterson with the boarding house, cleaning rooms and cooking meals for the residents. It was hard work, but Fiona threw herself into it with determination, and Mrs. Patterson proved to be a kind employer who appreciated her efforts. Mason visited as often as his work at the ranch allowed, which was usually 2 or 3 times a week when he came into town for supplies or to attend Sunday services at the small church. He and Fiona would walk together along the dusty streets, talking and laughing, growing more comfortable with each other. Mason found himself looking forward to those visits with an intensity that surprised him. He would count the days until he could ride into town again, planning what he might say or do. He brought her small gifts when he could afford them, a ribbon for her hair, a bag of peppermints from the general store, a small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked on the ride into town. Fiona accepted each offering with delight, treating them like treasures. One evening in early October, as the desert air finally began to cool from the brutal summer heat, Mason took Fiona to a spot on the edge of town where the land rose slightly, offering a view of the surrounding hills and the vast expanse of sky. They sat together on a flat rock, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, painting the clouds in brilliant colors. I have never seen anything like it, Fiona said, her voice full of wonder. The sunsets in Missouri were pretty, but this is something else entirely. It is one of the things I love about Texas, Mason said. The land is harsh, but it has its own kind of beauty if you know how to look for it. Like you, Fiona said, then blushed, as if she had not meant to speak the thought aloud. Mason turned to look at her, his heart hammering in his chest. What do you mean? You are kind and gentle, but there is strength in you, Fiona said, meeting his eyes. You saved my life, and you have been nothing but good to me since. I was so alone, Mason. I thought I had nothing left in this world, but you gave me hope. You showed me that there are still good people, that there is still something worth living for. Fiona, Mason said, his voice rough with emotion. He reached out and took her hand, marveling at how small it felt in his calloused palm. I have to tell you something. I have been thinking about you every day since I found you out there. I know it has not been long, but I feel like I have known you much longer. You have become important to me, very important. You are important to me too, Fiona whispered. More than I can say. Mason leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but she did not. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and sweet, full of promise and possibility. When they finally drew apart, both of them were smiling. I think I am falling in love with you, Mason said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. I know that is probably foolish and maybe too soon, but it is the truth. It is not foolish, Fiona said, her eyes shining with unshed tears, because I am falling in love with you too. They kissed again under the fading light, and Mason felt like his heart might burst from the joy of it. He had never expected to find love in his life, had assumed he would remain a solitary bachelor working the ranch until he was too old to sit a horse. But Fiona had changed everything. As autumn deepened and the weather cooled, Mason and Fiona's courtship continued to blossom. They became a familiar sight in Terlingua, the tall, quiet cowboy and the pretty young woman who had survived the stage attack. People talked, of course, but the talk was mostly kind. Everyone could see how happy they were together, how they lit up in each other's presence. Mason began making plans for the future. He talked to his boss at the Double T about the possibility of building a small house on a piece of ranch land, somewhere he and Fiona could live when they married. The boss, a grizzled rancher named Tom Tucker who had taken Mason under his wing years ago, agreed readily, pleased to see his best worker finally settling down. In November, as the first cold winds began to blow down from the north, Mason asked Fiona to marry him. They were walking back from church, and he simply stopped in the middle of the street, took both her hands in his and asked her to be his wife. Fiona did not hesitate. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, Mason, of course I will marry you. They were wed in December in the small church, with most of Terlingua in attendance. Mrs. Patterson cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief and declaring it the most beautiful wedding she had ever seen. Tom Tucker stood up as Mason's best man, and the school teacher, Miss Sarah Cunningham, served as Fiona's maid of honor. Mason had never been more nervous in his life than when he stood at the altar waiting for Fiona to walk down the aisle. His hands were sweating, and his collar felt too tight, but when he saw her in the simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson and some of the other women had helped her sew, all his nervousness vanished. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. They exchanged vows in front of the preacher, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. When Mason slipped the simple gold band onto Fiona's finger, a ring he had saved for months to buy, he felt like the luckiest man alive. The celebration afterward was lively, with food and music and dancing. Mason was not much of a dancer, but he did his best, holding Fiona in his arms as they swayed to the fiddle music. She laughed at his clumsy steps, but her eyes were full of love. "You gave me more than I asked," she whispered to him as they danced. "I only asked for water that day, but you gave me a whole new life. You gave me love and hope and a future. You gave me everything. You gave me the same, Mason said, pulling her closer. I was just going through the motions before you. Working, sleeping, nothing more. But you made me feel alive again. You made me want more than just surviving. They moved into the small house that Mason had built with help from Tom Tucker and some of the other ranch hands. It was modest, just 3 rooms and a front porch, but it was theirs. Fiona made curtains for the windows and planted flowers in the yard, transforming the plain structure into a home. Mason would come back from long days working cattle and find her there waiting for him, and the sight never failed to fill him with contentment. Their first winter together was cold but happy. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking and reading and simply being together. Fiona proved to be an excellent cook, and Mason never tired of coming home to hot meals and the warmth of her smile. They learned each other's habits and quirks, the small details that come with sharing a life. In the spring, Fiona discovered she was with child. She told Mason one evening after supper, her face glowing with excitement and nervousness. Mason was overwhelmed with emotion, pulling her into his arms and holding her tight, barely able to believe that his happiness could grow even larger. "Are you pleased?" Fiona asked, pulling back to look at his face. "Pleased does not begin to cover it," Mason said, his voice thick. "You have given me so much already, and now this. A child, our child." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Fiona remained in good health, though she tired more easily as the months went on. Mason was constantly worried, fussing over her and trying to make sure she did not overexert herself. Fiona tolerated his concern with good humor, assuring him that she was fine, and that women had been having babies since the beginning of time. Mrs. Patterson visited regularly, bringing supplies and advice, having helped with more births than she could count during her years in Terlingua. She declared that Fiona was healthy and strong, and that the baby would arrive right on schedule in late October. Mason found himself working even harder than usual, driven by the need to provide for his growing family. He took on extra responsibilities at the ranch, working from dawn until dusk to earn every penny he could. Tom Tucker noticed his dedication and rewarded him with a promotion to foreman, which came with a modest increase in wages. It was enough to make Mason feel more secure about the future, about his ability to take care of Fiona and their child. On a cool October evening, as the sun was setting and Mason was riding home from the ranch, he saw a rider approaching at full speed. His heart leapt into his throat when he recognized one of the younger ranch hands, Billy Mitchell, racing toward him. "Mason," Billy called out as soon as he was within earshot. "Mrs. Patterson sent me to fetch you. Your wife's time has come." Mason did not need to hear anything more. He spurred Russet into a gallop, racing toward home with his heart pounding. The ride seemed to take forever, though it could not have been more than 10 minutes. He burst through the front door to find Mrs. Patterson and Miss Cunningham bustling about, boiling water and gathering linens. "She is in the bedroom," Mrs. Patterson said, looking up at his wild entrance. "She is doing fine, but it will be a while yet. First babies take their time." Mason went to the bedroom, where Fiona lay on their bed, her face flushed and damp with sweat. She smiled when she saw him, reaching out her hand. "You made it," she said, her voice strained but happy. "Of course I made it," Mason said, taking her hand and kissing it. "Wild horses could not have kept me away." The labor lasted through the night and into the early morning hours. Mason stayed by Fiona's side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her brow, offering what comfort he could. He had faced down angry bulls and wild horses without flinching, but watching Fiona in pain was the hardest thing he had ever endured. Finally, as the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon, their son was born. The baby's cry filled the small house, strong and healthy, and Mason felt tears streaming down his face as Mrs. Patterson placed the tiny bundle in Fiona's arms. "He is perfect," Fiona whispered, gazing down at their son with wonder and exhaustion. "Look, Mason, we have a son." Mason looked at the small red face peeking out from the blanket, at the tiny fingers curled into fists, and felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it nearly overwhelmed him. "He is beautiful," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Just like his mother." They named him Matthew Thomas Thorne, the first name chosen by Fiona and the middle name honoring Tom Tucker, who had been like a father to Mason. Matthew was a healthy baby with a good set of lungs, and he quickly became the center of their world. The early months of parenthood were exhausting but joyful. Mason marveled at how natural Fiona was with their son, how she seemed to know instinctively what he needed. He himself felt clumsy and uncertain at first, afraid of holding Matthew too roughly or making some mistake. But Fiona was patient with him, teaching him how to hold the baby, how to change him, how to soothe him when he cried. Mason found himself working shorter days, unwilling to be away from his family for too long. Tom Tucker understood and was accommodating, having raised 5 children himself. The other ranch hands teased Mason good-naturedly about being a doting father, but he did not care. Nothing mattered more to him than Fiona and Matthew. As Matthew grew from an infant into a toddler, Mason and Fiona's life together deepened and strengthened. They faced the usual challenges that came with raising a child and running a household, but they faced them together, as a team. Their love for each other only grew stronger with time, weathering the small storms and celebrating the victories. When Matthew was 2 years old, Fiona announced that she was pregnant again. This time, Mason was less nervous, having been through it before, though he remained just as attentive and protective. Their second son, Michael, was born in the spring of 1887, another healthy baby who looked remarkably like his older brother. The house felt full now, bursting with life and noise and love. Mason added on 2 more rooms to give the boys space to grow, working in the evenings and on Sundays to complete the project. Fiona's garden expanded, providing vegetables and flowers that brightened their homestead. They acquired chickens and a milk cow, slowly building the small ranch into something substantial. The years passed in a blur of work and family, of watching their sons grow and learn and become their own people. Matthew was serious and thoughtful like Mason, while Michael was more outgoing and adventurous. They were good boys, respectful and kind, and Mason and Fiona were proud of them. Terlingua continued to grow as well, the Quicksilver mines bringing more people and prosperity to the region. The town acquired a proper school building, a second general store, and even a small bank. Mason and Fiona became respected members of the community, known for their kindness and their willingness to help neighbors in need. One evening, when Matthew was 10 and Michael was 8, the family sat together on the front porch watching the sunset. It was one of those perfect Texas evenings, the air warm but not oppressive, the sky painted in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Mason sat with his arm around Fiona, watching their sons play in the yard, and felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. "What are you thinking about?" Fiona asked, sensing his mood. "Just how lucky I am," Mason said. "I never expected any of this. A wife, children, a home. I thought I would spend my whole life alone, working the ranch and nothing more." "I never expected it either," Fiona said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "When I collapsed in that desert, I thought I was going to die. I thought that was the end of my story, but you found me. You saved me." "You saved me too," Mason said. "In a different way, maybe, but just as real." "You gave me more than I asked," Fiona said, echoing the words she had spoken to him years ago. "I only asked for water, but you gave me everything. A life, a love, a family, everything that matters." Mason turned to kiss her, a gentle press of lips that still held the spark they had felt on their first kiss all those years ago. "And I would do it again," he said. "Every single day I would choose you." The boys came running up to the porch, breathless and excited about some game they were playing, and the moment of quiet reflection passed. But the feeling remained, that deep contentment and gratitude for the life they had built together. More years passed, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. Tom Tucker passed away when Matthew was 15, leaving the Double T Ranch to his eldest son. But the new owner kept Mason on as foreman, recognizing his value and dedication. Mason's wages increased again, allowing him to buy a small herd of his own cattle, the beginning of his own ranch. Matthew grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet competence. He took naturally to ranch work and soon became Mason's right-hand man. Michael, while also capable with horses and cattle, showed more interest in the business side of ranching, learning to read market reports and manage accounts. Together, the four Thorne men became a formidable team, their small operation growing steadily. When Matthew turned 20, he announced that he wanted to marry a girl he had been courting, the daughter of a merchant in Terlingua. Mason and Fiona gave their blessing readily, seeing how happy the young couple was together. The wedding was held in the same church where Mason and Fiona had been married 20 years earlier, and Mason found himself thinking about that day, about how young and uncertain he had been, about how right everything had turned out. "They remind me of us," Fiona said, watching Matthew and his new bride dance at the reception. "They do," Mason agreed, "young and in love and ready to take on the world." "Do you ever regret it?" Fiona asked. "Sometimes I worry that I trapped you, that you only helped me out of obligation and then felt stuck." Mason turned to look at his wife, seeing the woman he had fallen in love with still shining through, even though time had added lines to her face and threads of silver to her dark hair. She was still beautiful to him, more so now than ever because she was his. "Never," he said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Fiona. You and our boys. I love you more now than I did the day I married you, and I loved you plenty then." Fiona's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you too, Mason Thorne. Every single day I thank God that you were the one who found me in that desert." When Michael turned 21, he surprised everyone by announcing that he did not want to be a rancher. He had been accepted to study law in San Antonio, and he wanted to pursue that path instead. Mason felt a pang of disappointment at first, having assumed both his sons would take over the ranch someday. But Fiona reminded him that they had raised their sons to think for themselves, to pursue their own dreams, and that Michael's success would be something to be proud of regardless of the path he chose. So Michael went to San Antonio, visiting when he could, and Mason and Matthew continued to build the ranch. They acquired more land, expanded the herd, and hired on a few trusted hands to help with the work. The Thorne Ranch became known throughout the region for quality cattle and fair dealing. Mason was in his 50s now, still strong and capable but feeling the aches and pains that came with age and a lifetime of hard work. He left more and more of the daily operations to Matthew, content to serve as an advisor and help where he could. He spent more time at home with Fiona, enjoying the slower pace and the chance to simply be together without the constant demands of work. They had grandchildren now, 3 from Matthew and his wife, and the small house that had once held just the 2 of them was often filled with the sound of children's laughter. Mason loved being a grandfather, loved spoiling the little ones and then handing them back to their parents when they got fussy. Fiona was in her element, doting on the grandchildren and passing on her recipes and wisdom to her daughter-in-law. One autumn evening, as they sat together on the porch watching another sunset, Fiona said, "Do you remember the first time you brought me to watch the sunset? That first month after we met?" "Of course I do," Mason said. "I kissed you for the first time that night." "You told me you were falling in love with me," Fiona said, smiling at the memory. "I thought my heart was going to burst." "Mine too," Mason admitted. "I was terrified you would think I was crazy." "I did think you were crazy," Fiona said with a laugh, "but in the best way. The kind of crazy that makes you brave enough to take a chance on something wonderful." "We have had a good life," Mason said. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "The best life," Fiona agreed. "And it all started because you gave a thirsty stranger some water." "I gave you water," Mason said. "But you gave me so much more. You gave me purpose and joy and love. You gave me a family and a reason to build something lasting. You made me into the man I always wanted to be." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and watching the colors fade from the sky. The evening was cool and Mason pulled a blanket over both of them, tucking it around Fiona's shoulders. "Promise me something," Fiona said softly. "Anything. Promise me that when I am gone, you will not mourn too long, that you will remember the happy times and smile instead of being sad." "Fiona, do not talk like that," Mason said, his throat tightening. "We are getting older, Mason. It is something we have to think about. I just want you to promise that you will keep living, really living, no matter what happens. You gave me such a beautiful life. I want to know that you will find joy even when I am not here anymore." "I promise," Mason said, though the words hurt to speak. "But you are going to outlive me by decades. You are too stubborn to do otherwise." Fiona laughed, that bright sound he had loved since the first time he heard it. "Maybe so, but I wanted to hear you promise anyway." They sat together until the stars came out, countless points of light scattered across the vast Texas sky. Mason thought about the night he had found Fiona in the desert, about how a single act of kindness had changed both their lives forever. He thought about all the years that had followed, the struggles and triumphs, the ordinary moments that had added up to an extraordinary life. He had given her water when she was thirsty, but she had been right. He had given her so much more than that, just as she had given him so much more than he had ever thought to ask for. They had given each other everything that mattered, love and partnership and family, building something beautiful together out of the harsh desert landscape. More years passed, and Mason and Fiona grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together family and friends from all over Texas. Michael came from San Antonio, now a successful lawyer with a family of his own. Matthew and his wife, who lived just down the road, helped organize the celebration. The grandchildren, now numbering 7, ran wild with excitement. Mason stood with Fiona, surrounded by everyone they loved, and felt overwhelmed by the fullness of his life. He looked at his wife, her hair now completely silver, her face lined but still beautiful, and marveled that they had been given so many years together. "What are you thinking?" Fiona asked, echoing the question she had asked him countless times over the decades. "That I am the luckiest man who ever lived," Mason said. "And that I love you more with each passing day. Even though I am old and gray now," Fiona teased. "Especially because of that," Mason said seriously. "Every gray hair, every wrinkle, they are all proof of the life we have lived together. You are more beautiful to me now than you were at 20. Fiona reached up to touch his face, her hand gentle. "You always did have a gift for saying exactly what I needed to hear." The party continued around them, full of music and laughter and love. Their granddaughter, Matthew's eldest, pulled them both onto the makeshift dance floor, insisting they dance together. Mason held Fiona in his arms, moving slowly to the music, and it felt just like their wedding day 40 years ago. Different in the details, perhaps, but the same in all the ways that mattered. As the evening wound down and the guests began to depart, Mason and Fiona stood on their porch, waving goodbye and thanking everyone for coming. When the last wagon had rolled away and they were finally alone, they sat down in their familiar spots, the chairs worn smooth by decades of use. "It was a wonderful party," Fiona said, sighing with contentment and exhaustion. "It was," Mason agreed. "Though I am glad it is just the two of us now. I love our family, but I love quiet evenings with you even more." They sat in silence for a while, comfortable with each other in the way that only comes from a lifetime together. The night air was cool and clean, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the moon. "Mason," Fiona said eventually, "I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made Mason turn to look at her, concern creasing his forehead. "What is it?" "I have been feeling poorly lately," Fiona admitted. "I did not want to worry you, especially not before the anniversary party. But I have been having pains in my chest, and I get so tired now, more than I should." Mason felt his heart clench with fear. "We need to get you to a doctor, tomorrow, first thing. We will go to El Paso if we have to, find the best doctor available." "I already saw Doc Henderson in town," Fiona said. "He thinks my heart is failing. There is nothing to be done, Mason. It is just age catching up with me." "No," Mason said, the word coming out harsh and desperate. "No, you are going to be fine. You have to be fine." "Oh, my love," Fiona said, reaching for his hand. "We have had 40 beautiful years together. 40 years more than I ever expected when I was dying in that desert. Whatever time I have left, whether it is days or months or years, I am grateful for all of it." Mason pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, feeling her warmth and solidity against him. The thought of losing her was unbearable, a pain worse than anything physical he had ever endured. She was his partner, his love, his reason for everything. He could not imagine a world without her in it. But even as fear and grief threatened to overwhelm him, Mason forced himself to be strong for her. She needed his strength now, not his fear. There would be time for grief later if it came to that. For now, he needed to cherish every moment they had left. "I love you," he said, his voice breaking. "I will always love you." "I know," Fiona whispered. "And I will always love you too. Even when I am gone, my love will still be here with you." The months that followed were bittersweet. Fiona continued to decline slowly, her energy waning with each passing week. Mason arranged for her to see doctors in El Paso, but they all confirmed what Doc Henderson had said. Her heart was simply wearing out, and there was no cure for old age. Mason refused to leave her side more than necessary. Matthew took over complete control of the ranch, insisting that his father stay home with his mother. The grandchildren visited often, bringing joy and laughter into the house. Fiona rallied when they were around, smiling and playing games and telling stories, but Mason could see the exhaustion it cost her. One evening in late spring, as the desert was blooming with unexpected wildflowers after a rare rain, Fiona asked Mason to carry her out to the porch. She wanted to watch one more sunset, she said. Mason lifted her carefully, marveling at how light she had become, and settled her in her favorite chair with blankets wrapped around her despite the warm evening. They sat together as the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold and purple. Fiona held Mason's hand, her grip weak but steady. "It is beautiful," she said softly. Just like that first sunset you showed me all those years ago." "It is," Mason agreed, though he could barely see it through the tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Mason," Fiona said. "For everything. For finding me when I was lost. For loving me when I felt unlovable. For building this beautiful life with me. You gave me more than I asked for. You gave me everything." "And you gave me everything too," Mason said, his voice thick with emotion. "You were my salvation, Fiona. You made my life worth living." They watched the sun disappear below the horizon, the colors fading from the sky. As the first stars began to appear, Fiona squeezed Mason's hand one last time. "I am so tired," she whispered. "I think I need to rest now." "Then rest, my love," Mason said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "I am here. I will always be here." Fiona closed her eyes, a small smile on her lips, and her breathing slowly grew more shallow. Mason held her hand and watched her face, memorizing every detail, every line and curve. He told her he loved her over and over, making sure she heard it, making sure she knew. As the stars multiplied overhead and the night deepened around them, Fiona took one last gentle breath and then was still. Mason sat with her for a long time, holding her hand, feeling the warmth slowly fade from her skin. He cried then, deep wrenching sobs that came from the very core of his being, mourning the loss of the woman who had been his everything. But even through his grief, Mason felt a strange sense of peace. Fiona had not suffered at the end. She had gone peacefully, surrounded by beauty, held by the man who loved her. And she had given him 41 years of love and joy and partnership, 41 years more than either of them had expected when he found her in that desert. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Texas. Fiona had touched countless lives with her kindness and generosity, and people came from miles around to pay their respects. Mason stood between his sons, accepting condolences and listening to stories about his wife, learning new things about the ways she had helped others without ever seeking recognition or praise. She was laid to rest in the Terlingua Cemetery, on a hill overlooking the town and the desert beyond. Mason stood by her grave long after everyone else had left, talking to her the way he had talked to her every day for more than 4 decades. "I promised you I would keep living," he said, "that I would remember the happy times and find joy. I am going to try, Fiona. It will not be easy without you, but I am going to try, for you." The weeks and months that followed were the hardest of Mason's life. The house felt empty without Fiona in it, her absence a constant ache. He would catch himself starting to tell her something before remembering she was gone. He would wake in the night reaching for her, finding only empty space beside him. But Mason kept his promise. He continued to get up each morning, to eat meals and visit with his sons and play with his grandchildren. He helped out at the ranch when Matthew needed him, offering advice and experience. He attended church on Sundays and sat on his porch in the evenings, watching the sunsets and remembering. Slowly, gradually, the sharp edge of grief began to dull. The pain was still there, would always be there, but it became something he could live with. He could think about Fiona now without breaking down, could smile at the memories instead of only crying at the loss. One evening, about a year after Fiona's death, Mason was sitting on the porch when Matthew came to visit. His eldest son settled into the chair that had been Fiona's, the chair Mason had not been able to bring himself to move or change. "How are you doing, Pa?" Matthew asked. "I am all right," Mason said, and was surprised to realize it was mostly true. "I miss your mother every day, but I am all right." "She would be proud of you," Matthew said. "The way you have kept going. She always said you were the strongest man she knew." "Your mother was the strong one," Mason said. "I just tried to live up to her example." They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Matthew spoke again. I have been thinking about something Ma used to say, about how you gave her more than she asked for that day you found her. She said that a lot over the years, Mason said, smiling at the memory. But it was not just you giving to her, Matthew continued. She gave you just as much, maybe more. You both gave each other everything you had, and that is what made your marriage so special. That is what I try to do with my own wife, what I hope Michael does with his. You showed us what love really looks like. Mason felt his throat tighten with emotion. Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know. We are grateful, Pa, for you and for Ma, for the life you built together, for the family you gave us. You started with nothing but a canteen of water and a kind heart, and you built something that will last for generations. After Matthew left, Mason sat alone on the porch, thinking about his son's words. It was true, he realized. He and Fiona had built something lasting, something that would continue long after both of them were gone. Their children and grandchildren carried forward the love they had shared, the values they had lived by. Mason lived for another 8 years after Fiona's death. They were good years, full of family and purpose. He watched his grandchildren grow up and begin having children of their own, making him a great-grandfather. He saw Matthew's ranch continue to expand and prosper. He attended Michael's swearing-in as a judge in San Antonio, bursting with pride at his son's accomplishments. He never remarried. Several well-meaning friends and family members suggested he might want to find companionship again, but Mason always declined gently. He had been blessed with one great love in his life, and that was enough. No one could replace Fiona, and he did not want to try. On a warm October evening, when Mason was 74 years old, he sat on his porch watching the sunset. His body was failing now, worn out by age and a lifetime of hard work, but his mind was still sharp. He thought about his life, about the ranch and his family, and all the years he had been given. Most of all, he thought about Fiona. He could see her so clearly in his memory, as vivid as if she were sitting beside him. He remembered the first time he saw her, collapsed and dying in the desert. He remembered her eyes when he gave her water, the gratitude and hope in them. He remembered their first kiss, their wedding day, the birth of their sons, countless ordinary moments that had added up to an extraordinary life. "I kept my promise," he said aloud, speaking to her as if she could hear. "I kept living. I found joy where I could, but I am tired now, my love. I am ready to rest." That night, Mason Thorne died peacefully in his sleep. He was found the next morning by Matthew, who had come to check on him as he did every day. There was a smile on Mason's face, and those who saw him said he looked younger somehow, as if a great burden had been lifted. He was laid to rest beside Fiona on the hill, overlooking Terlingua. The funeral was huge, attended by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, by friends and neighbors and people whose lives he had touched. The preacher spoke about Mason's kindness and generosity, about how a simple act of giving water to a stranger had blossomed into a love story for the ages. Matthew stood at his father's grave. His own children and grandchildren gathered around him and thought about the legacy his parents had left behind. Not just the ranch or the money or the land, but something far more valuable. They had shown him and Michael, and through them all the generations that would follow, what it meant to truly love someone. They had demonstrated that kindness and compassion could change lives, that one small act could ripple outward in ways you could never predict. "You gave her more than she asked," Matthew said softly, echoing his mother's words. "But she gave you just as much, and together you gave us everything." Years continued to pass, and the story of Mason and Fiona Thorne became something of a legend in Terlingua. Parents told it to their children, who told it to their children. The tale of the cowboy who gave water to a dying stranger and found his soulmate. The small house Mason had built was preserved by the family, maintained by generations of Thornes who came after, a testament to where their family story had truly begun. The ranch continued to thrive and grow, eventually becoming one of the most successful operations in that part of Texas. But more than the material success, the Thorne family became known for their kindness and their willingness to help those in need. Values passed down directly from Mason and Fiona. On the hill in the Terlingua cemetery, their graves sat side by side, the headstones simple but well maintained. People would sometimes stop there, standing between the markers, and think about the love story that had unfolded in this harsh but beautiful landscape. They would think about how something as simple as offering water to a thirsty stranger could change the course of two lives, creating ripples that spread outward through time and space, touching people who would never even know the names of those who had started it all. Because in the end, that was the real legacy of Mason and Fiona Thorne, not the ranch or the family or the years they had been given, though all of those were blessings. Their true legacy was the lesson they had taught through their lives and their love, that kindness matters. That one person can make a difference, that giving someone what they need, even if it is just water in the desert, can lead to miracles neither of you could have imagined. Mason had given Fiona water when she asked, but she had been right. He had given her so much more than that. He had given her life and love and hope and family and joy and purpose. And she had given him all of those things in return, transforming a solitary cowboy into a man surrounded by love, into someone whose life had meaning and depth and richness beyond measure. Their story was proof that love could bloom even in the harshest environments, that two people who found each other at the worst possible moment could build something beautiful together. It was a story of rescue and redemption, of kindness repaid 1,000-fold, of two souls who found exactly what they needed in each other. And it all started with a simple act of compassion on a dusty Texas plain in 1883, when a cowboy named Mason Thorne saw a stranger in need and did what any decent person should do. He helped. He gave water to someone who was thirsty. And in doing so, he gave both of them everything they would ever need. The desert winds continued to blow across the Texas landscape, carrying dust and heat and the whispers of stories long past. Terlingua continued to change and grow, the Quicksilver mines eventually playing out but the town enduring, adapting, surviving. The Thorne family remained a pillar of the community, generation after generation, each one carrying forward the legacy of love and kindness that Mason and Fiona had established. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, people swore they could see two figures sitting on that hill by the cemetery, holding hands and watching the sunset together, their love transcending even death itself. Whether it was real or just the play of light and shadow, it did not really matter. What mattered was that Mason and Fiona Thorne's love story had become part of the land itself, woven into the fabric of Terlingua and all who called it home. They had lived good lives, full of love and purpose and meaning. They had raised fine sons who had gone on to raise fine children of their own. They had built something that lasted, something that would continue long after their names were forgotten by all but family historians. And they had proved, beyond any shadow of doubt, that the greatest treasures in life are not found in gold or land or wealth, but in the connections we make with other people, in the love we give and receive, in the simple act of being there for someone when they need it most. Mason Thorne had offered water to a thirsty stranger, and she had said he gave her more than she asked. But the truth, understood by both of them long before the end, was that they had given each other everything worth having. And that was a legacy that would truly last forever.